As a teenager, I was required to wear a fiberglass brace underneath my clothes on a daily basis. While I didn't consciously know this at the time, it's now my earliest remembrance of trying to find beauty in a broken situation. I credit myself, humbly of course, with starting the trend in the 80s of wearing oversized, blousy shirts cinched at the waist with wide belts. Because at that time, I was 15-ish, and the brace made me look pregnant as the edges overlapped on my abdomen. Let's rock. Are you walking through a storm that feels like it will never end? Do you wonder if life's storms have stolen the beauty from your life for good? You're in the right place. My name is Heather, and like you, I've been through a storm or two and wondered if life would ever be beautiful again. Here we share warriors' words, stories of discovering beauty after battles, and the worth in your wounds. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome, warriors. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to remind you of my fundraiser. I am raising funds to start a nonprofit. In His wisdom, God has chosen someone with no money to start a nonprofit and build a home. I balked at this at first and questioned, just like Gideon, but I came to realize that by using someone who can't do this, God's might, God's power, God's love is what shines. Through all of us working together, it's not one person who gets the glory. It's God. So this is God's project, and it's up to His people to make it work. Please go to kofi.com/warriorwords, and that's KO-FI, kofi.com/warriorwords. You can make a one-time donation. You can set up a monthly donation. And you can also purchase anything that I have in that store, things that I've created. And I will contribute the profits from those purchases to this fund as well. Now, a few episodes ago, I mentioned that I'd have a medical update coming soon. But first, I have to do a little backstory. Well, two backstories, actually. Because this medical situation is really two. There are two situations that have converged and are finally being addressed. The first backstory is literally a back story from my childhood. I was diagnosed with scoliosis as a child. I had what was called a double S curve. There was a primary curve in my mid to lower back and a compensatory curve between my shoulders. And as a teenager, I was required to wear a fiberglass brace underneath my clothes on a daily basis. And while I didn't consciously know this at the time, it's the first time I remember trying to find beauty in a broken situation. And I credit myself, humbly, of course, with starting the trend in the 80s of wearing those oversized, blousy shirts cinched at the waist with those wide belts. Because at the time, I was 15-ish, and the brace made me look pregnant as the edges overlapped on my abdomen. When I turned 18, my doctor said that I was 2 degrees away from their criteria for surgery, and that surgery would have put a rod in my back. So you might guess that I was relieved at that point. But then nothing was ever done after that. There was no other treatment if I didn't have that surgery. So I went through life with this double curve and lots of pain. I had lower back pain almost always, and I have the tightest muscles surrounding my shoulder blades, plus neck pain and mild headache on the regular. I started sleeping with pillows under my knees to help with the pain at night. And I struggle with MRI tubes because they can't adjust my positioning enough. So it's just something I lived with. Now, fast forward to the summer of 2019 for the next backstory. Now, stick with me because I will connect the two. On June 15th, 2019, I was walking in the John Paul II Prayer Garden in Baltimore City with my kids. There was a walking path around the garden and 2 steps that would take you down into the grassy area. I stepped onto the first step with my left leg, and something didn't land right. My ankle rolled. My body crumpled to the ground in pain. My kids helped me to a seated position, and I knew something was terribly wrong. There was a kind couple in the garden, and they saw what happened from the other side, and they came over to help. Now, they saw the swelling, but the wife said she was sure it wasn't broken. So they helped me up and steadied me beside my kids who flanked me on either side. Somehow, they were able to assist me just enough to walk out of the garden, and I use the term walk loosely, and they got me along a city sidewalk to our car waiting in a parking garage. Now, remember I said this was my left foot, and praise God for that because neither of my kids could drive at that point. Do you see where I'm going with this? Yes, I drove myself to an urgent care. And that urgent care was closed. So from there, I had to let go and I had to call 911. But if they were to take me by ambulance, one or both of my kids would have had to stay behind because they couldn't take all 3 of us. So I had no choice. I had to drive myself to the nearest hospital. The x-rays came back, severe ankle sprain and a fractured 5th metatarsal. That's a term I learned that day, but it simply means the outside bone of the foot. And I was diagnosed with what was called a Jones fracture, which basically identifies the location of the break as closer to the ankle bone. Now, I remember sitting in the casting room. The tech told me that if I was an athlete, they'd just fix me up in surgery and I'd be walking within 2 weeks. We laughed. Nonetheless, I was cast and then, several weeks later, was put in a cam boot. No one could possibly know what was to come less than 6 months later. On January 2nd, 2020, I was diagnosed with cancer. The foot and ankle were no longer a primary concern. Then in March of 2020, I was in a chemo chair when the lockdowns hit. The foot and ankle moved farther down the priority list. So I was pretty much immobilized. Not I, but I guess my ankle and my foot were pretty much immobilized with no further treatment until 2021, more than 2 years after my initial fall. But I was finally able to try PT. And I did end up regaining some of that strength and the flexibility, but I was still in an ankle brace. And I would remain in that ankle brace until Thanksgiving of 2023. Things were looking up, and I felt okay about walking until the fall of 2024, when I sprained the ankle again. And then in March of 2025, you guessed it, I sprained it again. So back to PT I went. This time it was for something called aggressive physical therapy. And here's where my two backstories collide. During this aggressive form of physical therapy, I worked harder. I gained more strength, and I improved my flexibility. But there were days I could not walk after physical therapy. And for the next 24 hours, it was excruciatingly painful, limiting my ability to sit in an office chair and drive as well. So my ankle PT was aggravating my back. And they eventually made the decision to discharge me from PT because they could not advance me any further. Great. I thought, now what? I went into physical therapy to hopefully, finally fix that ankle problem. And I came out with an unhealed ankle and an angry back. And this led me to pain management for my back and the ankle surgeon for my foot. The first pain management specialist I saw told me that surgery was not my best option. Well, good, I thought, because the idea of spinal surgery scared me. But what he suggested was almost as scary. He wanted to surgically implant in my abdomen a pain pump that would administer a daily dose of narcotics to the base of my spine. No, thank you. Next. So I got a second opinion and saw another pain management doc, and his solution seemed a little more sensible. We'd try something called an ablation, where he'd essentially burn the nerve in my lower back. It doesn't solve the root of the problem, but it would act more like a Band-Aid to mask the pain. Now, as of this recording, I've already had the 2 insurance mandated tests to see if it's a viable option and that I am a viable candidate. And as of the date this episode airs, it will be 1 week before that ablation occurs. And that ablation will occur less than 48 hours before ankle reconstruction surgery. That's crazy, y'all. It's going to be a wild week for sure. But it's actually working out well, and in a way only God could have orchestrated, because the ablation is actually painful in the first few days because that nerve is angry that it's been burned. And it takes a while for that nerve to calm down. So by having the surgery 2 days later, the pain medicine that they're going to give me for operating on my ankle, well, that will help ease the pain of both procedures. Now, the surgery itself is actually fascinating. I'm getting what's called an internal brace, and that's actually a trademarked name, but it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a brace that will be on the inside of my ankle, and it will act kind of like a seat belt. So it will stabilize the ankle and prevent, in theory, future sprains. So if you have any interest in that, you can actually go to a website called anklesprain.com and you can learn more about it. Now, one of the things that convinced me to say yes to this surgery is, don't laugh. Well, you can laugh. I found out a few of my favorite baseball players have had this surgery on their elbows, and they are successfully playing Major League ball again. So I'm hoping that if they can play Major League level ball, that I can at least walk normally again. And here's another completely God thing. Remember when I said earlier that the tech who cast my ankle originally said that if I was an athlete, I'd have surgery and be fine in 2 weeks? Well, I shared this with a doctor friend of mine, and she said that this was God timed. Because if I had had the surgery back in 2019, it would have likely failed and would need to have been redone now anyway because of my cancer. You see, God knew I had cancer, and He knew what I would endure. That cancer led to chemo and 5 years of hormone blockers. Both did damage to my bones. I developed osteopenia and mild osteoarthritis. And that means if I had had the surgery back in 2019, the pins holding the brace to my bones would have likely fallen out. The deterioration of my bones would have compounded the problem. My surgeon, actually, he purposefully waited to perform this surgery so that I could have 3 months in between stopping my hormone blockers and having the surgery. He knew that there was a good chance that time, extra calcium, and D3 would heal my bones enough to make this surgery viable now. Now, there is a chance that those pins still won't hold, but that chance is statistically less now. And the surgery lines up well with the ablation. It's God's timing, not mine. I could not have planned this better. So I go into December with a hope-filled spirit, trust in God, and faith that I will be able to walk into Christmas Eve Mass on my own with no lower back pain and no assistive device on my foot. Now, on a more practical note, what does this mean for the podcast? Well, I have a wonderful guest for next week's episode, but the rest of December is kind of up in the air. I have plans, but refer again to the title of this episode. I have plans for a surgical update episode, but I'm not guaranteeing that. I'm also hoping that I'll be able to record a Christmas episode and New Year's episode. But again, no promises. And there may be a week, maybe 2, I don't know, with no Tuesday episode at all. It just depends on what I can get done in these next few days as I prepare for surgery. Oh, wait, the bobs. The Bobs are still going to come out every Friday in December. They've already been recorded and scheduled out until the end of the year. So those will still air. And there will be at least one episode per week for Advent and throughout December, and maybe two. So I ask for your prayers throughout this month as I will be 100% non-weight bearing for 2.5 weeks. And as you know, I am a single parent and my son can't drive. A friend has loaned me her wheelchair, and another friend is helping with food. My daughter is also going to come out and stay with me for a few days. She gets to take me to the hospital for the surgery, and then she'll stay with me for a few days as I get adjusted to my December normal. But it's still going to be rocky. So I would really appreciate your prayers. So until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.